We've successfully generated the command file type, and we still have to do the test file type, which will be basically a repetition, but it doesn't hurt to repeat something complicated. So let's look again at how we create a command type for a file. Okay, so here we have the inside of static command test.hbs, which we had copied from the pull command. Just to be consistent, let's open pull to see the original within test, and let's open up command test HBS and work to get things consistent. Remember that we need to stick a file info indicator at the beginning of the file in the present version of NSFlip. We have a natural section name of import, so let's create an import section. It would make sense to create a custom field for custom imports. Here we have a description of a test for a single command. We don't know how many commands we will have. As before, we're describing a test for a given command. It's called pull. We know how to set up names. The names object is part of our context and includes singular lowercase, as you can see from the documentation. Within this general describe are separate tests, but if you look carefully, the test is a test of a particular parameter. We might have many. Therefore, we need to use each, as we did in the commands file. Each is a built-in handlebars helper. It would seem that this is a test based on that particular parameter. Everything in here we're going to have to fill in based on the particular values for that parameter. Notice, however, that we are again referring to the name of the command. How do we access that in handlebars when we're using each? We can still refer to everything one level up in the context using the two dots. One level up from specs params should be names. What I want to do right now is run this. Let's check the generated file. That was the original file. Here is a generated file. As you can see, there are no custom imports at this point for this particular. Notice that pull is properly being generated. It looks like things are doing pretty well. Let's go back now and do the rest of this test. The each handlebars helper allows you to refer using the word this to the current instance. In this case, this param within specs params has a flag. An incorrect value for project's file is the name of the parameter. Now we have a problem. No such file or directory is an error message. That was generated by code that's custom code. So as before, we have to go back into the NP file and add that additional requirement into specs. Let's do so. Remember that we have specs for the parameters. I'm assuming it's the same, but it could be different. Now somebody can generate an error message as they need. We could add something like this textual version, but sometimes you just have to be reasonable. Instead, let's change this to be just this name. So it'll say project's file, camel case. We can test that and make sure that it's working correctly, and then we can do the final test as well. Notice that now it says project's file, but otherwise it looks the same as before. Going to the final one, once again, we need to refer to the name of the command. Let's make sure that this is working correctly for pull, but also for push. Here is push test. That's looking reasonable, but let's see how it looks when we compare it. Well, it would seem that it's essentially the same. There is a bit of a difference in the spacing. However, the differences to me look negligible. Let's copy that file over. Now let's look at pull. Again, the vast majority of changes are on this side. Looking through, I can see that the big difference is spacing. We can, if we want, update the spacing. We'll regenerate to see if the new spacing helps. Let's try that. Now you can see that there are specific differences because we've gotten rid of the big difference of spacing. There are some differences. Unfortunately, I put an extra minus in when I created the flags, it looks like. We need to insert a minus. It looks as if this should be moved over by 2 if we're concerned about spacing. For reasons I don't yet grasp, there seems to be a large section that we're missing. Let's have a look at the generated version of pull. This is not unreasonable for a first attempt. Notice that we don't care about this change because we've decided that we're going to use the easier approach. it would seem that our expect in line 29 is indented too far forward or too far back. Otherwise, it looks pretty clean. Just to be on the safe side, let's do it again. We have things on the left like we like, with the exception of the 2 lines that we intentionally are changing. Very well. It's time to copy. Now let's look at how we're doing with pull. There's no difference with pull. Let's now do a general diff. It does seem that there's a difference with push, but that's because we moved things over earlier and modified the spacing in the new one. So we should be able to set push to the file, copy that over, do a general diff, and compare. Now we have to once again deal with the meta code, but first we're going to take care of the Readme. Now we see that there's a difference between the Readme as that there's always been, and there's also a lot of changes to the meta. We know what to do with meta. Let's change the file to meta. We're now down to having just one generated file that's different. Since the file is generated, we don't really have to worry about it. Let's move over to the sample directory and test it and make sure that it's still working. We have to run npm link here. npm link makes the default command proj be in that directory, be what is the project version that's in samples. The help seems to be working as before. You may recognize this. What commit message would you like, and so on. Because there was nothing to commit, nothing changed. But you can see that Projectories is working. Now we have a version of Projectory that we can keep constant, making revisions to our template. We also can share template, and other people can be able to do the same thing. One last thing that we should do is a final checklist. We should go into our README and modify it to explain exactly everything that needs to be done, getting started, and so on. I'm not going to do it right now, but it shouldn't be hard to do. A second last step is we created an NS YAML file, and we need to make sure to copy the full contents of that file into our sample, because basically the version that we copied from Projectories is going to become their default original project. Or if you want, you can change it, whatever you want to do. Then, as a final step, it would make sense for you to go to the site of Oak Cliff on GitHub. You'll have to sign in. When you sign in, you'll be able to click here to watch, and then you can be informed of updates, because as the maintainer of this repository, especially if you share it with others, you should remain up to date. And whenever there are improvements to Oak Cliff, you should make sure to incorporate them into your template. So that's how you make a template. Please contact us if you're interested in any help. Make sure to go to our community and join there and ask questions there. We do plan to follow this up with a video showing how someone can use your template and how people can modify the code effectively.